When Sarah Martinez stepped off the bus at Fort Rucker, the morning sun was already shining brightly over the airfield. The air smelled of jet fuel, metal, and heat, a smell that most people found harsh, but to her it smelled like purpose. She adjusted her small duffel bag on her shoulder and looked around. Big hangars stood in neat lines, each filled with helicopters. Apaches, Blackhawks, and Chinooks. The kind of machines she had dreamed of working on since she was a kid. Sarah was not like the others walking through the base that morning. She was smaller than most of the men around her, and her uniform looked almost new. Some soldiers gave her curious glances, while others didn't bother hiding their smirks. It wasn't the first time she'd felt that kind of reaction. Ever since she joined the army as an aircraft maintenance technician, she had learned how to read people's faces. The quick look that said, "Can she even handle this job?" But Sarah didn't say anything. She just walked with quiet determination toward her assigned hangar. Inside, the noise was almost overwhelming. The sharp clanging of tools, the hiss of compressed air, the constant hum of engines being tested. A tall sergeant with grease on his hands looked up from his work and called out, "You the new tech?" She nodded and introduced herself. The sergeant handed her a clipboard and pointed to the far side of the hangar where an AH-64 Apache sat. Its dark, angular frame looking both beautiful and intimidating. "That's your area," he said. "Start by cleaning it up. We've got inspections later this week." Sarah walked toward the Apache slowly, her boots echoing on the concrete floor. She couldn't help but stare at it. The Apache was more than just a machine. It was a beast of the sky, powerful, dangerous, and elegant in its own way. She ran her hand gently along the metal surface, feeling the cool steel under her fingers. To anyone watching, she looked like just another rookie assigned to grunt work. But in her eyes, this wasn't just cleaning. It was a kind of respect, the same respect a soldier gives to a flag or a fallen comrade. Within minutes, she rolled up her sleeves and began working. The hangar was hot and noisy, but she didn't mind. She wiped away old oil stains, dusted the panels, and polished the glass cockpit until it gleamed. As she worked, she heard laughter from a group of mechanics nearby. One of them, a young man with a wrench tucked into his belt, nudged his friend and said, "Looks like the new girl's on janitor duty." Another replied, "Well, someone's got to make it shine." They laughed, but Sarah didn't even look up. She had heard worse before. Her father used to say, "Let them laugh, Mija. You'll answer them with your work." So that's what she did. After a while, one of the older mechanics walked by and watched her work in silence. He noticed how carefully she checked every bolt and how she didn't rush through even the smallest task. Most new recruits would do the bare minimum, but not her. When she finished cleaning one part, she would check the manual to make sure everything was exactly right. It wasn't normal behavior for someone on their first day. By lunchtime, her uniform was covered in grease stains. Her hands were sore, and sweat dripped down her face. She sat on a small crate, drinking from her canteen. Across the hangar, the same group of men who had laughed earlier were eating and joking loudly. Sarah sat alone, watching the Apache in front of her. Despite the exhaustion, she felt something warm in her chest, a quiet kind of pride. This was where she belonged. She remembered the stories her older brother, Daniel, used to tell her before his last deployment. He had worked with Apaches too. He used to say, "These birds don't just fly, they protect. Every bolt you tighten, every surface you clean, it all matters." Those words stayed with her, echoing now as she looked at the helicopter's dark silhouette against the sunlight. A loud voice broke her thoughts. "Hey, Martinez," the sergeant called. "How's that bird looking?" Sarah stood and wiped her hands on a rag. "Almost done, Sergeant. She's got some rust around the tail section. I'll take care of it before the inspection." The sergeant raised his eyebrows. "Good eye," he said, almost surprised. "Most folks don't even notice that on day one." Then he gave a small nod and walked away. That small bit of recognition meant a lot to her. It wasn't praise exactly, but it was a start, a sign that maybe, just maybe, she was being seen for her work and not just her size or gender. As the day ended, the hangar lights flickered on, casting a golden glow over the rows of helicopters. Most of the mechanics packed up and left, but Sarah stayed a little longer. She walked around the Apache one more time, checking her work. Then she stood back and looked at the helicopter in silence. It looked ready, almost alive. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, faded patch. Black fabric with a silver sword and wings embroidered on it. It belonged to her brother. She touched it gently, then tucked it back into her uniform sleeve, hidden from view. Tomorrow she would come back before sunrise and keep working. She knew people would still laugh, still underestimate her. But one day they would understand why she was really there. For now, it was just her and the Apache, and the promise she had made to honor the man who once flew beside it. The next few days at Fort Rucker were hard for Sarah. Every morning, she woke up before the sun rose, tied her hair neatly, and walked straight to the hangar. The air was always cool and quiet at that hour, and she liked it that way, no noise, no eyes watching her. She could work in peace before the others arrived. By the time the rest of the crew showed up, Sarah had already checked her tools, cleaned up the workspace, and started inspecting the Apache. She loved those quiet hours. But once the others came in, the teasing began. At first, it was small, harmless comments that sounded like jokes but carried a sting. One morning, while she was wiping the cockpit glass, a mechanic named Jenkins walked by and laughed. "Hey, Martinez, you missed a spot," he said, pointing at the rotor blades high above her head. "Better grab a ladder before the bird complains." The others chuckled, and Sarah just smiled politely. She didn't answer back. Instead, she climbed the ladder, took her cloth, and cleaned the blades without a word. Jenkins rolled his eyes. "Man, she actually did it," he whispered to another mechanic. "Guess she really likes cleaning duty." They didn't know that Sarah wasn't just cleaning. She was learning. Every nut, every wire, every small piece she touched. She made a mental note of it. She wanted to know the Apache like the back of her hand. During lunch breaks, the rest of the team sat together at the big table, eating and talking loudly about football, cars, or missions they had been part of. Sarah usually sat on the side with her lunchbox, quietly eating and listening. Once, a younger soldier looked at her and asked, "So, why did you join this job anyway? Most girls go for desk work. You like oil and grease that much?" Sarah smiled and replied softly, "I like making sure the pilots come back safe." The soldier blinked, not knowing what to say. Jenkins laughed and said, "Don't worry, Martinez. These birds are tougher than you think. A little dust won't take them down." He didn't understand that for Sarah it wasn't about dust, it was about discipline and duty. One afternoon, while everyone was preparing for an inspection, Sarah stayed behind to recheck one of the hydraulic lines she had noticed earlier. It looked slightly worn, and she didn't want to take any chances. As she crouched under the Apache, she heard footsteps and laughter. "Look at this," one voice said. "She's under there like she's fixing a car." Another added, "Hey, careful, Martinez. Don't get stuck." Their laughter echoed in the hangar, but Sarah didn't move. She tightened the bolts carefully, her hands steady. When she finished, she slid out and looked up at them. "If that line had failed mid-flight," she said calmly, "the whole system could have gone down." For a second, they were quiet. Then Jenkins smirked and said, "Relax, we've got inspectors for that." Sarah didn't respond. She wiped her hands, picked up her clipboard, and walked away. Later that day, during the inspection, the same hydraulic line was checked, and the inspector confirmed that it had been on the verge of failure. The sergeant nodded at Sarah as he signed the report. "Good catch, Martinez," he said. "That could have been serious." Jenkins and his friends said nothing. Still, the teasing didn't completely stop. People have a way of making fun of what they don't understand. To them, Sarah's dedication looked strange. She worked through breaks, stayed late, and refused to cut corners. Some started calling her Miss Perfect behind her back. Others joked that she was trying too hard to impress the officers. But Sarah wasn't trying to impress anyone. Every time she touched the Apache, she remembered her brother Daniel. How proud he looked in his uniform, how he used to tell her stories about the sky, about the power and danger of these machines. He once said, "If you ever work on one, Treat it like a living thing. Every screw holds a life. Those words guided her every day. One evening, as she was finishing up, she overheard two mechanics talking near the tool bench. "Man, that girl's weird," one said. "She acts like that chopper's her baby." The other replied, "Yeah, but you gotta admit, it's the cleanest Apache in the hangar." Sarah smiled to herself. She didn't need their approval. Her work spoke for her. By the end of her first month, something began to change. The pilots who flew the Apache she maintained started to notice how smooth their flights were, how everything seemed to work perfectly. They began to ask, "Who's the tech assigned to this bird?" When they heard the name Martinez, they were surprised. One morning, as Sarah was checking the landing gear, a pilot walked past and said, "You're doing good work on that bird, Martinez." She looked up, caught off guard. "Thank you, sir," she replied. It was a small moment, but it meant the world to her. The others noticed it too. Jenkins didn't joke as much after that. Some of the crew even started asking her for help when they couldn't figure something out. Slowly, the laughter around her began to fade, replaced by quiet respect that nobody wanted to admit out loud. But Sarah didn't care about what they thought. She wasn't here for approval or praise. She was here for something bigger, a promise she made to someone who could no longer be here. And deep down, she knew that one day, the truth about that promise would come out. And when it did, everything would change. For now, she just wiped her hands, packed her tools, and looked at the Apache one last time before leaving the hangar. Tomorrow, she would come back again, early as always, ready to face the laughter, the whispers, and the work. Because in her heart, she knew every great story starts with someone being underestimated. Days turned into weeks, and Sarah Martinez became a quiet but familiar figure around the hangar. While others laughed, joked, and moved at their own pace, she stayed focused. She arrived before everyone else and was usually the last one to leave. Her tools were always lined up perfectly, her checklist always complete. It was as if the Apache was her own personal mission, not just a job. Every morning, the sun would barely be up when Sarah walked through the hangar doors. The world outside was still sleepy, but inside, the air already smelled like fuel and grease. She liked those early hours, the stillness before the noise. She would run her hands over the cool metal of the Apache, almost like she was greeting an old friend. Then she would start her inspection. She checked everything, the rotor blades, the tail assembly, the hydraulics, the wiring, things most mechanics skipped when they were in a hurry. She used a small flashlight to peek into corners that others ignored. She didn't just clean. She studied. Every sound the machine made, every scratch or vibration, she memorized it. She was learning its language piece by piece. One morning, Jenkins walked in and saw her lying on her back under the helicopter, using a small brush to clean a narrow metal joint. He laughed and said, "You know no one's ever gonna see that part, right? You could skip it and no one would notice." Sarah didn't look up. "Maybe," she said calmly, "but I'd notice." Jenkins shook his head and walked away, muttering, "You're something else, Martinez." He didn't understand. For Sarah, it wasn't about being seen. It was about doing things right. She had seen what happened when people didn't. Her brother's helicopter had gone down overseas because of a mechanical issue no one had caught in time. That memory burned in her heart every time she tightened a bolt or replaced a line. She had promised herself that no pilot would ever suffer because someone got lazy. Some days were especially hard. The Alabama heat made the hangar feel like an oven, and sweat ran down her neck and soaked her shirt. Her hands were often covered in oil, her fingernails dark from grease that never seemed to wash off. But she didn't complain. She never once said she was tired, even when her back ached from bending over the machine for hours. Her dedication didn't go completely unnoticed. The older sergeant, the one who had first assigned her to the Apache, began watching her more closely. One afternoon he called her over. "Martinez," he said, looking down at his clipboard, "you logged 12 hours yesterday. You know you're only required to do 8. "Yes, Sergeant," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "So why stay?" Sarah thought for a moment before answering. "Because this isn't just another helicopter, sir. Every flight depends on us doing our part. If I miss something, even something small, it could cost someone their life. I can't take that chance." The sergeant studied her face for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Keep it up," he said quietly. "We need more people who care like that." Still, not everyone understood her. Some of the younger mechanics said she was trying to show off. One of them joked, "She probably thinks she's building a new Apache from scratch." Another said, "She works too hard, makes the rest of us look lazy." Sarah didn't argue. She just smiled and said, "Maybe hard work isn't such a bad look." She began to earn quiet respect from the pilots too. They noticed that the Apache she maintained always performed perfectly. Smooth controls, steady systems, no sudden faults. One pilot even told the sergeant, "Whoever's maintaining that bird deserves a medal." When Sarah overheard it later, she just smiled to herself. It wasn't about medals, it was about trust. Every time a pilot climbed into that cockpit, she wanted them to be safe. Sometimes, when everyone else went home, Sarah stayed behind. She would sit on a small stool beside the Apache, staring up at it while the hangar lights buzzed softly above her. Those were the moments she missed her brother the most. She could almost hear his voice teasing her, saying, "You really followed me into this world, huh?" She would whisper softly, "Yeah, I did. I'm doing it right this time." Her brother's old patch, the one with the Night Stalker's insignia, was still tucked into her sleeve. She touched it often, as if it gave her strength. It reminded her that every machine had a story, every flight had a risk, and every life mattered. One evening, as she was finishing up, a storm rolled in. Rain hammered against the hangar roof, and thunder echoed outside. Most of the crew had already gone home, but Sarah stayed. She worked under the dim light, tightening a few loose bolts before the inspection scheduled for the next morning. When she finally finished, she stood back and looked at the Apache. The sound of rain filled the silence. She smiled, tired but proud. This was more than work for her. It was healing. Every day spent with that machine helped her feel closer to her brother. Every perfect flight meant she was protecting someone else's brother, someone else's family. Her hands were calloused now, her muscles stronger, her confidence growing. The same people who once laughed at her now watched her with quiet curiosity. Some had even started asking her questions about parts and procedures. She helped them without arrogance, always patient and calm. Sarah didn't say it out loud, but she knew she was slowly earning her place. Not through words, but through sweat, discipline, and heart. She was proving that real strength didn't always shout. Sometimes, it worked quietly under the sound of spinning rotors and falling rain. It was a quiet afternoon at the hangar, one of those hot days when the air seemed to shimmer above the concrete. The big doors were open, and sunlight spilled in, making the polished metal of the Apaches glint like gold. Most of the crew were working slowly, their movements lazy under the heat. But Sarah was as focused as ever. She had her sleeves rolled up, her hair tied back, and a smudge of grease on her cheek that she hadn't noticed. She was polishing the tail rotor of her assigned Apache, carefully, patiently, as if it were something precious. From a distance, she looked like just another maintenance tech. But if someone looked closely, they'd see something different. The calm way she moved, the care in her hands, the small look of pride in her eyes. She wasn't just cleaning a helicopter. She was tending to it, like someone taking care of a friend. While she worked, she didn't notice a figure walking into the hangar. It was Captain James Reynolds, one of the senior Apache pilots on base. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with quiet confidence, the kind that comes from years of flying dangerous missions. The noise in the hangar dropped a little when he entered. Even the jokers like Jenkins straightened up when the captain was around. Captain Reynolds scanned the room, his eyes moving across the rows of helicopters and the busy crew. Then his gaze stopped on Sarah. He watched her for a moment, curious. She was crouched by the landing gear, inspecting a small bolt with the focus of a surgeon. It was rare to see that kind of attention from anyone, especially someone so new. He walked closer, his boots echoing on the floor. Sarah didn't hear him at first. She was too focused. When she finally noticed the shadow falling beside her, She looked up and froze for a second. The captain's uniform, his flight patches, and the serious look in his eyes told her who he was immediately. She stood quickly and saluted. "Good afternoon, sir," she said. "At ease," he replied. His voice was calm but firm. "You're Martinez, right?" "Yes, sir," she said quietly. He nodded slightly and looked past her at the helicopter. "This your bird?" "Yes, sir. I maintain it." He walked around the Apache slowly, his eyes tracing every detail. After a moment, he said, "It's in perfect condition. I've seen senior techs who don't keep their machines this clean." "Thank you, sir," Sarah replied, trying to hide the small smile that wanted to form on her face. Compliments were rare. As the captain walked past her, something caught his eye, a small patch on her uniform sleeve. It was old and faded, with a silver sword and wings on a black background. He stopped in his tracks. That emblem, he knew it well. It belonged to the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers. He turned to her and asked carefully, "Where did you get that patch?" Sarah hesitated for a moment. Her hand instinctively brushed against it. "It was my brother's, sir," she said softly. The captain's eyes widened slightly. "Your brother?" "Yes, sir. Staff Sergeant Daniel Martinez." The name hit him like a sudden gust of wind. Captain Reynolds froze. He knew that name, he could never forget it. Years ago, during a mission in Afghanistan, Sergeant Daniel Martinez had been one of the best crew chiefs in his unit. The man had been sharp, brave, and deeply respected. Reynolds remembered the night Daniel's helicopter had gone down during an operation. It had been a painful loss, one that every pilot in the unit still remembered. For a few seconds, the hangar seemed to fade away. All the sounds, the clanging tools, the humming engines grew distant. Reynolds looked at Sarah again, this time really seeing her. The same eyes, the same calm expression, the same quiet strength. "I flew with your brother," he said finally. His voice was low, almost emotional. "He was one of the finest crew chiefs I ever met." Sarah's eyes softened. "I know, sir," she said. "He talked about you sometimes. He said you were one of the good ones, one who never forgot to thank the team on the ground." The captain didn't know what to say for a moment. The hangar felt heavier now, filled with a silence that carried both sadness and pride. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said quietly. "Thank you, sir," she replied. "He's the reason I'm here. I wanted to do what he did, to make sure every pilot who flies comes back safe." Reynolds nodded slowly. "You're doing him proud, Martinez. He'd be glad to see you here." A few of the other crew members nearby had noticed the conversation. They couldn't hear everything, but they could tell from the captain's tone that something serious, something meaningful, was happening. When he finally walked away, he paused for a moment and gave Sarah one last look. It wasn't just respect, it was recognition. After he left, the hangar buzzed again, but this time, something had changed. The same men who once laughed at Sarah now looked at her differently. They didn't understand the full story yet, but they could feel that there was more to her than they had ever realized. Sarah stood quietly beside the Apache, her hand resting on the metal. She took a deep breath. For the first time in a long while, someone had spoken her brother's name aloud. Not with pity, but with respect. As the day went on, she returned to her work, her movements calm and steady. The patch on her sleeve caught the sunlight as she worked, glowing faintly against the dull green of her uniform. She didn't wear it to show off. She wore it as a promise, one she had made to her brother and to herself. And now, at last, someone had noticed. After that day, something inside the hangar felt different. The air around Sarah seemed to carry a quiet kind of respect. The men who once laughed at her now kept their voices low when she passed. No one said anything directly, but everyone had seen the way Captain Reynolds had spoken to her. The way his face had changed when he saw that old patch on her sleeve. It wasn't the kind of reaction you saw often from a pilot, especially one like him. Sarah didn't talk about it, though. The next morning, she came in just as early as always, her uniform neat, her hair tied back, her sleeves rolled up. She went straight to the Apache and started her checks. To her, nothing had changed. She was still there to work, still there to make sure every nut and bolt was in its right place. But deep down, she could still feel that moment replaying in her mind. The look in Captain Reynolds's eyes when he recognized her brother's name. It wasn't just surprise. It was something deeper. It was memory. Later that afternoon, as Sarah was tightening a few bolts near the landing gear, she heard footsteps approaching. When she looked up, she saw Captain Reynolds again. He was holding a folder under his arm, but he didn't look like he was there for inspection. "Martinez," he said, his tone calm but friendly. "Sir," she replied, standing quickly and wiping her hands on a cloth. He smiled a little. "Relax. I'm not here for a report." She hesitated for a moment, unsure how to respond. He motioned toward the Apache. "Mind if I take a look?" "Of course not, sir," she said. He walked around the helicopter, running his hand along the smooth panels. "Your brother used to talk about these birds like they were alive," he said after a pause. "He used to say, every Apache has a heartbeat. You just have to listen for it." Sarah smiled faintly. "He said that to me too, sir. I thought he was just being dramatic." The captain chuckled softly. "No, that was Daniel. Always made things sound bigger than life. But he meant it. He believed that every person who touched this machine, pilot, gunner, or mechanic, had a part in keeping that heartbeat strong." For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The noise of the hangar faded behind them, just the faint hum of tools and the echo of voices in the distance. Then the captain said quietly, "When I saw that patch on your sleeve, it caught me off guard. It's not something you see often outside the 160th. Sarah looked down at it, her fingers brushing over the worn fabric. "I keep it with me because it reminds me why I'm here," she said. "I couldn't save him, sir. But maybe I can save others by doing my part right." The captain's eyes softened. He nodded slowly. "He would have been proud of you. You know, your brother wasn't just a good crew chief. He was one of the best I ever flew with. Always calm, always focused, even when things got bad. He saved my team once." Sarah looked up, surprised. "He did?" "Yeah," the captain said, his voice quiet now. "We were flying low during a night mission. Something went wrong with the hydraulics mid-flight. Daniel caught it fast. Faster than anyone else could have. His quick fix saved the whole crew. We made it back safely because of him. I never forgot that." Sarah swallowed hard, her throat tight. "He never told me that part," she said softly. The captain smiled faintly. "He wouldn't. He wasn't the type to brag." For a long moment they stood there in silence, both of them thinking of the same man, the same memory. The hum of the hangar seemed far away. Then Captain Reynolds said quietly, "When I saw you working the other day, I thought of him. You have his hands, steady, careful. The same focus." Sarah felt her chest tighten, a mix of sadness and pride filling her heart. "Thank you, sir," she said. "That means a lot." He nodded again. "Keep doing what you're doing, Martinez. The others might not understand it now, but they will. Dedication like yours, it stands out. It always does." And with that, he gave her a respectful nod and walked away. After he left, Sarah stood there for a moment, staring at the Apache. Her hands were trembling slightly, but her heart felt warm. For the first time, someone had truly seen her. Not just as a rookie or a woman in a hangar full of men, but as a Martinez, as Daniel's sister, carrying on his legacy. That evening, when most of the crew had gone home, Sarah stayed behind again. The sky outside was turning orange and pink, the sound of distant helicopters echoing in the air. She sat on a small crate beside the Apache, thinking about what the captain had said. She could almost hear her brother's voice in her head, laughing that same easy laugh, saying, "You're doing it, kid. You're keeping them safe." Sarah reached up and touched the patch on her sleeve. The fabric was rough and faded, but it felt alive in her fingers. She whispered softly, "I miss you, Danny, but I'm not stopping. Not until I've done my part." As the lights in the hangar flickered on, she stood and picked up her tools again. The day might have been over, but her mission wasn't. Somewhere in the distance, the captain was telling others about her, about who she was, and whose legacy she carried. And slowly, the laughter that once followed her name began to fade, replaced by a quiet kind of admiration. Sarah didn't need applause or attention. She just needed that one moment, that moment of recognition, to remind her that everything she was doing mattered. And from that day forward, she worked with even greater purpose, knowing her brother's spirit flew with every Apache she touched. After that conversation with Captain Reynolds, Sarah felt something change inside her. For the first time since joining the base, she didn't feel invisible. Someone had finally understood the reason behind the patch she wore so proudly on her sleeve. The small, faded piece of fabric that carried her brother's memory. But most people in the hangar still didn't know the full story. They saw the patch now and then, but they didn't understand what it meant or why she refused to take it off, even when others told her it wasn't regulation. To them, it was just an old insignia, a reminder of some unit they'd heard about but didn't really know. One afternoon, as the sun hung high and the hangar buzzed with work, Jenkins approached her again. He had been quieter lately, not as sarcastic as before. He watched her inspect the Apache's tail rotor, and after a moment, he said, "Hey Martinez, that patch. It's from a special unit, right?" Sarah looked up, surprised by his tone. It wasn't mocking this time. It was curious. "Yeah," she said softly. "It belonged to my brother." Jenkins nodded slowly. "Was he in the Night Stalkers?" She smiled faintly. "You know about them?" "Just stories," he said. "Those guys fly into places no one else will." Sarah took a deep breath and sat down on a nearby crate. For a moment, she stared at the helicopter, its dark body gleaming under the hangar lights. "Yeah," she said quietly. "That's exactly what they do." The others nearby had noticed the conversation and were listening, pretending not to. It wasn't often that Sarah talked about her personal life. She continued, her voice calm but filled with emotion. "My brother, Daniel Martinez, was a crew chief with the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers. He was older than me by 6 years. When we were kids, he used to tell me stories about flying through the night, about missions no one could talk about trust between pilots and mechanics." She smiled faintly at the memory. "He said the helicopters felt different in the dark. He said you could hear the air move around the blades, and sometimes it felt like the sky was holding its breath." The hangar was quiet now. Even the sound of tools had faded a little as people listened. Sarah continued, her eyes distant, lost in the memory. "He loved what he did. He loved those Apaches. He said they were the closest thing to wings a human could ever have. But then one night his bird went down. I remember the day they came to our house, 2 men in uniform standing by the door. My mom dropped the dish she was holding, and my dad just stood there, frozen." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "They said it was a mechanical failure during a mission overseas. Something small, something that shouldn't have been missed. That line broke and they lost control. He didn't make it back." No one spoke. Even Jenkins, who usually always had something to say, just stood there quietly. Sarah looked down at the patch on her sleeve, brushing it gently with her fingertips. "After that, I couldn't sleep for months. I kept thinking about what he'd told me, about how every bolt, every wire, every screw mattered. I wasn't a soldier then. I was just his little sister, studying mechanics at a community college. But one night, I decided I'd follow his path. Not as a pilot, I didn't want to fly. I wanted to be the one who made sure others could come home safe. The one who checked the things that no one else noticed." Her voice softened. "So I joined the army. I trained hard, failed a few times, got back up again. Every test, every inspection, I told myself, do it like Daniel would've. When I finally earned my spot here, I stitched his patch onto my sleeve. It's not regulation, but I couldn't leave it behind. It reminds me why I'm here." For a long moment, the hangar was silent except for the faint hum of the fans. Then Jenkins cleared his throat softly. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "I'm sorry for what I said before." Sarah looked up and gave him a small smile. "It's okay. You didn't know. Most people don't." Another mechanic, a younger one, spoke up. That's That's brave, Martinez. What you're doing. Sarah shook her head gently. It's not brave. It's just right. I owe it to him, and to every pilot who gets into one of these birds, trusting that it'll bring them back. At that moment, Captain Reynolds walked in. He had heard the last part of her words and stopped near the entrance, listening quietly. When Sarah noticed him, she stood up and saluted. He returned the salute, then said, "Carry on, Martinez." But before turning away, he added, "Your brother would have been proud of how you carry that patch. You honor him every day." Sarah felt her throat tighten, but she held back her tears. "Thank you, sir," she said softly. When the captain left, the others went back to their work, quieter, more thoughtful than before. The teasing stopped completely after that day. No one laughed when Sarah cleaned or double-checked her work. Some even started helping her without being asked. It wasn't just respect anymore, it was understanding. That evening, as the sun set behind the hangar, Sarah stood beside the Apache again, watching its dark shape glow under the fading light. She touched the patch on her sleeve one more time and whispered, "I hope you're watching, Danny. I'm doing it right this time." The wind blew softly through the open hangar doors, carrying the faint sound of distant rotor blades, like an answer from far away. Sarah smiled. The story behind that small patch wasn't just about loss anymore. It was about love, duty, and the promise that even in silence, some legacies never die. After that day, something truly changed in the hangar. It wasn't loud or sudden, but slow and steady, like the rising of the morning sun. The same people who once smirked when Sarah walked by now greeted her with small nods. The laughter that used to echo behind her back had disappeared, replaced by quiet respect. Sarah noticed it, of course, but she didn't act differently. She still came early before the others and stayed late. She still cleaned every part of the Apache like it was made of gold. She still spoke little and worked a lot. But this time, when she picked up a wrench, there were more hands willing to help her. One morning, Jenkins walked over carrying a toolbox. "You missed breakfast again, Martinez," he said, setting it beside her. "Figured you might need a hand." Sarah smiled a little. "I thought you hated early mornings." "I do," he said with a grin. "But Captain Reynolds said he wants this bird in top shape before the next flight, and you're the best one to check it." She raised an eyebrow. "He said that?" "Word for word," Jenkins replied. Then, after a moment, he added, "You've earned his trust, and ours too." Sarah didn't say anything right away. She just nodded, her eyes softening. "Thank you," she said quietly. As the day went on, the atmosphere felt lighter. The team worked together more smoothly than before. Even when things got tough, when bolts wouldn't fit or hydraulic lines leaked, there was no frustration, no blaming. Everyone worked with patience. It was as if Sarah's quiet dedication had rubbed off on them. Later that afternoon, while the crew ran diagnostics, Captain Reynolds came into the hangar with another pilot. They were discussing something serious, their voices low. When they reached the Apache, the captain turned to Sarah. "Martinez," he said, "the higher-ups want to know who's responsible for maintaining this unit. The last 2 test flights ran perfectly. No errors." Sarah wiped her hands and straightened. "That would be the whole team, sir," she said. "Everyone worked hard on it." Reynolds smiled slightly. "That's true. But I also know leadership when I see it, even when it doesn't come with stripes." Sarah blinked, unsure how to respond. "Thank you, sir," she said finally. After the captain left, Jenkins turned to her, shaking his head with a laugh. "You know, a few weeks ago, none of us would have believed this. We thought you were just some quiet rookie who didn't belong here." Sarah chuckled softly. "I didn't care what you thought. I just wanted to do my job." "Yeah, well," Jenkins said, grinning, "you did more than that. You made the rest of us better." Over the next few weeks, Sarah noticed more changes. When new recruits arrived, the older mechanics didn't haze them anymore. Instead, they guided them the way Sarah had guided herself. When something went wrong during maintenance, no one pointed fingers. They worked together to fix it. Even the pilots began showing more appreciation. One of them, Lieutenant Harris, often stopped by to ask questions about how things worked. "I never realized how much detail goes into keeping these birds flying," he admitted one day. Sarah smiled. "It's all in the details, sir. One small mistake can make all the difference." Harris nodded. "That's what Captain Reynolds said about your brother." Hearing that name still hurt sometimes, but it also made her proud. "He taught me everything I know," she said softly. Word about Sarah spread quietly around the base. People started calling her the Apache Whisperer because it seemed like every helicopter she worked on flew smoother. When something didn't sound right, she could hear it before anyone else did. It wasn't magic, it was focus, the kind her brother had taught her. One evening, as the sun set behind the hangar and the sky turned orange, Sarah stood with her crew, watching a pair of Apaches lift off. The rotor wash whipped through the air, blowing dust around their boots. Jenkins shouted over the noise. "Looks like your bird's flying again, Martinez." Sarah smiled, shading her eyes with her hand. "It's not my bird," she shouted back. "It's ours." As the helicopters disappeared into the horizon, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. For the first time since joining the base, she didn't feel like she was proving herself. She felt like she belonged. Later that night, when the hangar was empty, she sat alone on a crate, her gaze fixed on the Apache resting silently before her. The machine looked calm, almost like it was sleeping. She ran her fingers over the patch on her sleeve again, feeling the rough stitches beneath her skin. Her brother's words echoed in her mind. "Every Apache has a heartbeat. You just have to listen." She closed her eyes and listened. In the stillness of the hangar, she could almost hear it. The faint hum of something alive, something strong. When she opened her eyes again, she smiled softly. "You were right, Danny," she whispered. "They listened. They finally listened." The next day, Captain Reynolds announced a special maintenance program, a mentorship system for new mechanics. And to everyone's surprise, he picked Sarah to lead it. "Martinez knows what dedication looks like," he said during the briefing. "If anyone can teach others how to care for these machines the right way, it's her." Sarah felt her heart swell with pride. It wasn't about recognition or rank, it was about trust. The same trust her brother once earned. That night, as she walked out of the hangar, the stars spread wide above her. The air smelled of oil and dust, familiar and comforting. She looked back one last time at the Apache shining under the lights. The laughter that once followed her was gone forever. In its place, there was something much stronger, respect. The kind that wasn't given easily, but earned through quiet strength and unwavering heart. Sarah smiled to herself. Her brother's patch wasn't just a memory anymore. It was a symbol of family, courage, and the power of never giving up, no matter who's watching. And from that day on, everyone in the hangar knew. When Sarah Martinez worked on an Apache, it wasn't just maintenance. It was love, legacy, and promise, all held together by steady hands that had finally found their place. Months passed, and Sarah Martinez had become one of the most trusted names in the hangar. Her quiet strength and patience had turned her from an outsider into a leader. People no longer saw her as just the girl who cleaned the Apache. They saw her as someone who carried something powerful inside her. Purpose. The mentorship program she led was growing fast. Every few weeks, new recruits came in, nervous and unsure, just like she once was. Sarah guided them through everything: how to check hydraulic lines, how to listen to the soft hum of the rotors, how to feel the rhythm of the machine instead of just following manuals. But she didn't just teach them about tools and engines. She taught them about respect for the aircraft, for the job, and for the people who flew those machines into danger. "Every Apache tells a story," she often said, her calm voice echoing in the hangar. "It carries the sweat of those who built it, the hands of those who fixed it, and the courage of those who fly it. Never forget that." The young mechanics admired her deeply. Many of them had heard whispers about her past, about the patch she wore and the brother who never came home. They never asked her directly, but they all knew that patch wasn't just decoration. It was a promise. One afternoon, a new recruit named Tyler joined the team. He was young, eager, and a little too confident. On his first day, he rushed through his checklist, trying to impress everyone. Sarah watched him quietly for a while before walking over. "Slow down," she said gently. He looked up, confused. "I've done this before, ma'am. I know what I'm doing." Sarah smiled. "Maybe, but around here knowing isn't enough. You have to feel it too." He frowned slightly. "Feel it?" She pointed to the Apache behind her. "Every screw, every wire, every mark. They all have meaning. If you treat this like just another machine, you'll miss what's important. Let me show you something." She led him to the left side of the aircraft, where a small scar marked the metal surface. "See this?" she said softly. "That's not a scratch. That's a reminder. This Apache took fire once, but it still came home. You see, Tyler, these helicopters aren't just metal and bolts. They carry lives." Tyler nodded slowly, realizing she wasn't just talking about the aircraft. "Is that why you wear that patch?" he asked quietly. Sarah's fingers brushed over it. "Yes," she said simply. "My brother taught me that when you take care of something, or someone, with your whole heart, they never really leave you. That's why I do this." From that day, Tyler changed. He stopped rushing, started listening, and soon became one of her best students. Watching him learn reminded Sarah of herself when she first arrived. Unsure, determined, carrying a quiet grief that no one else could see. Weeks turned into months, and soon, the base prepared for a big mission. Several Apaches were being readied for deployment, and Sarah's team was working around the clock. Everyone trusted her judgment completely. The night before the departure, Sarah stayed behind in the hangar alone. The sky outside was dark, filled with stars. The wind blew softly through the open doors, carrying the scent of oil and metal. She walked up to the Apache, the same one she'd been caring for since her first day, and placed her hand on its nose. "You've come a long way," she whispered. "Just like me." For a moment, she closed her eyes and imagined her brother standing beside her, smiling that same easy smile. She could almost hear his voice saying, "You did good, kid. You made me proud." Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't wipe them away. They weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of peace. The next morning, as the helicopters prepared for takeoff, Captain Reynolds came over to her. He looked at her with a proud smile. "You've built quite a team, Martinez," he said. "They trust you more than anyone." Sarah smiled. "They just needed someone to believe in them, sir. Like you did for me." He nodded slowly. "You've done more than believe, Sarah. You've built a legacy, one your brother would be proud of." As the engines roared to life and the Apaches lifted off one by one, Sarah stood with her team watching. The rising dust swirled around them, glowing golden in the morning sun. Tyler turned to her and said, "One day, I want to be like you." Sarah smiled softly, her eyes still on the sky. "Don't be like me," she said. "Be better." The helicopters disappeared into the horizon, their blades echoing like a heartbeat through the air. That sound, steady, powerful, alive, filled her chest with warmth. When the noise faded, she looked down at her sleeve. The patch was worn now, its edges frayed from years of work, but she couldn't imagine ever taking it off. It wasn't just her brother's patch anymore. It was hers too, a symbol of everything they both stood for. That evening, as the sun set and the hangar quieted again, Sarah sat alone with her notebook, writing down everything she'd learned. Not technical details, those were already in manuals. She wrote about lessons from experience, about care, trust, and heart. She planned to leave it behind for the next generation, a small guide titled, "The Heart of the Apache." As she closed the notebook, she whispered to herself, "You'll always fly with me, Danny. Always." The wind blew gently, rustling the pages before she tucked it away. Outside, the sky was painted in gold and pink, the same colors she remembered the day she first arrived. Sarah smiled, feeling calm. She wasn't the new recruit anymore, nor the one people mocked. She was now the heart of the hangar, the living proof that true strength isn't about rank or recognition. It's about love, duty, and never giving up, even when the world doubts you. And as the night settled in, somewhere deep inside her, she could still hear it, the sound of rotors beating like wings and her brother's voice whispering through the wind, proud and peaceful. The legacy of the Martinez siblings lived on. In every bolt she tightened, every pilot who took off, and every Apache that returned safely home.